The cicadas were screaming the day Eulalie Fontenot found out she was carrying her husband's father. Not in the way the church ladies giggled about behind paper fans, Lord, that Ray Jr. looks just like his granddaddy did at that age, but in the cold, medical way that made the nurse at the Tupelo clinic go quiet and close the door before she spoke. The kid had been Ray Jr.'s idea, a half-drunk Christmas gift ordered off the television at 3 in the morning. Send in your spit and find out if you're secretly Cherokee or Viking. He'd spat in his tube laughing, mailed it off with $20 and a postage stamp, then forgot the whole thing until the plain white envelope showed up wedged in the mailbox between seed catalogs and an overdue notice from the light company. Eulalie only did hers to shut him up. She licked the inside of the plastic wand while the cornbread burned, sealed it, dropped it in the same mail pouch because the company offered a family bundle discount. She never expected results at all. Half the folks in Possum Hollow still swore ancestry tests were a government trick to steal your soul through saliva. 3 weeks later the email pinged on Ray Jr.'s cracked phone while he was elbow-deep in a transmission at the shop. He whooped loud enough for the other mechanics to hear, came home greasy and grinning with printouts flapping like winning lottery tickets. "Look here, baby, we got us some Black Dutch and a little Creole way back. Mama's gonna pitch a fit." He made her sit on the couch and open her own results together, the way they used to tear into presents when money was flush. The first page loaded slow over the spotty hotspot. Eulalie watched the little wheel spin and felt the baby shift, a sudden hard roll that stole her breath. Then the wheel stopped. The screen went from cheerful blues to stark medical white. A red banner flashed across the top, unusual result, physician review recommended. Below it, a pie chart that didn't make sense. Where Ray Jr.'s chart showed a colorful scatter of European and trace native, hers was almost entirely one color, a sickly institutional green labeled Fontenot patrilineage 49.8%. The rest was grayed out as unresolved/close kinship. Ray Jr. frowned, scrolled, laughed it off as a glitch. "Must have mixed the barcodes, darlin'. Happens all the time on the message boards." But Eulalie's eyes had already snagged on the raw data table lower down. The column marked predicted relationship to fetus didn't say father, Ray Fontenot Jr., like his did. It said grandfather, paternal Ray Fontenot Sr., with a confidence score of 99.9997%. The numbers swam. She felt the room tilt the way it does right before you faint in church. She zoomed in until the letters blurred. Shared centimorgans, 3,487. Identical segments longer than any grandparent-grandchild pair in the company's entire database. The report used phrases like extreme runs of homozygosity and coefficient of inbreeding exceeding documented human limits. A tiny asterisk led to a footnote. Cases this elevated are vanishingly rare outside certain isolated religious communities or multi-generational consanguineous unions. Ray Jr. kept talking, scrolling, trying to make it a joke again, but his voice thinned out when he saw her face. The phone slipped from her fingers and clattered on the linoleum. On the screen, frozen, the company's polite customer service message glowed, "We recommend immediate genetic counseling. Some findings may be distressing." Outside, heat lightning flickered over the soybean fields, bright enough to cast shadows through the mini blinds. In that white flash Eulalie saw every ancestor on the wall chart staring back at her with the same washed-out eyes, mouth sewn shut by a century of secrets. The baby kicked again, harder, as if it already understood the numbers and hated them. The storm came in sideways, a black wall of rain that turned the dirt road to red soup and knocked the power out clean across 3 counties. Ray Jr. was still gone, chasing double time on a rig outside mobile, texting every few hours that he'd be home soon, swear to God. Just one more hitch. Eulalie sat alone in the dark trailer, listening to the tin roof drum and the pine trees whip themselves to pieces, one hand spread protectively over the small firm curve that had appeared almost overnight. Headlights cut through the downpour around 10, high and crooked the way only Ray Sr.'s old Ford sat on busted springs. She watched from behind the curtain as he climbed out in his slicker, unbothered by the gale, carrying a mason jar that caught the lightning like moonshine fire. The dogs wouldn't even bark at him anymore, they just thumped their tails against the porch boards and whined. He knocked once, polite as a deacon, then walked in without waiting because Fontenot men never waited on their own land. The kitchen bulb flickered back to life on the generator's cough, painting everything sickly yellow. He set the jar on the table, unscrewed the lid, and the sharp smell of peaches and pure grain alcohol filled the room like a threat. "Figured you might need company," he said, voice low under the storm's roar. "Bad night to be alone with Junior's young un." She backed up until the counter dug into her spine. "I'm fine. You can go." But he was already looking at the swell beneath her nightgown, eyes wet and shining the way they got when he talked about prize coonhounds or the war. He took one step, then another, slow, the way you approach a spooked mare. The floor creaked under his weight exactly like it had that night in April when she'd screamed into a pillow that still smelled like Ray Jr.'s aftershave. "You know what it is," he said, almost gentle. "Same blood that built this house. Same blood that held this holler when the Yankees come through burnin'. Everything wasn't nailed down. Ain't no shame in keepin' it strong." His hand rose, liver-spotted and trembling just a little, and settled over hers on the belly. She felt the baby jerk at his touch, a sudden violent twist that made her gasp. His smile showed the brown teeth she remembered from childhood, the ones that used to scare her when he'd lean over the fence and offer her a stick of Beeman's gum. "Feel that," he whispered. "He knows his granddaddy." The lightning struck close then, so bright the bulb exploded in a shower of sparks, and in that white instant she saw his face inches from hers, smelling of liquor and wet wool and something older, like creek mud and smoke-cured meat. She brought the cast-iron skillet up from the counter behind her with everything she had, felt the solid thunk against his temple, heard the jar hit the floor and shatter into 1,000 sweet-smelling pieces. He went down hard, blood mixing with peach brandy, but even as his eyes rolled back he was still smiling like he'd won something. The thunder rolled over them both, long and satisfied, and the rain kept falling as if it meant to wash the whole county clean and never quite manage it. Ray Jr. came home 3 days after the storm, sunburned and smelling of diesel, carrying a stuffed pelican for the baby and a fistful of cash he fanned across the table like playing cards. He found Eulalie on the porch steps, knees drawn up, staring at nothing while the cut on Ray Sr.'s forehead scabbed over into a purple crescent he claimed came from a falling limb. Junior listened to the story she'd rehearsed, the lights going out, the old man bringing liquor, the way he'd pinned her wrists above her head and told her this was how Fontenot survived Reconstruction and the flu and the Depression, by closing the circle tight. She left out the skillet, said she need him and ran until he passed out drunk. She waited for the rage, for the shotgun, for the sirens she'd never called because the sheriff was Ray Sr.'s cousin twice over. Instead, Ray Jr. went still the way a hound does when it catches a scent it's been bred for centuries to follow. He looked at his father dozing in the recliner with a dish towel bandage, then at the faint bruises blooming on Eulalie's arms like storm clouds, then down at her belly where the baby had begun to show in earnest. He asked only one question, soft as creek water over stones. "Is it strong?" She couldn't speak. She nodded once. Something shifted behind his eyes, the same flat shine she'd seen in old tintypes of men standing over fresh-dug graves with rifles across their knees. He reached out, laid his rough palm over the place where the child moved, and pressed until she felt the answering kick against his skin. "Good," he said. "Blood knows blood." That night he carried the family Bible down from the top shelf, the one bound in cracked calfskin with the family tree inked inside the cover. He opened it to the blank pages at the back where generations had recorded births and deaths in brown, spidery hands. He uncapped a pen, wrote the expected due date in careful block letters, then beneath it, in smaller script, Ray Fontenot, 4. He underlined the question mark twice, like a man leaving himself room to change his mind. When she tried to protest, he kissed her quiet, tasting of snuff and chewing gum, whispering against her mouth that outsiders wouldn't understand, that the land itself demanded payment for every crop, every calf, every breath taken on Fontenot dirt. He said the child would be proof they'd paid in full, that nothing from outside could ever dilute what God and hardship had forged. Later, in the dark with the window open to the smell of wet pine, he traced the curve of her stomach and told her stories she'd never heard, great aunts who married first cousins to keep the acreage whole, a set of twins born in 1918 who shared one name between them because the midwife couldn't tell which came first, a grandmother who danced barefoot at her own brother's wedding and called it tradition. Each tale ended the same, the family endured. The land stayed theirs. The circle held. And somewhere in the black beyond the screen, an owl called 3 times, slow and deliberate, the way the old folks said it did when death walked close but changed its mind at the door. The labor started at dawn on a February morning so cold the creek iced along the edges and the hound wouldn't leave the porch. Eulalie had been up all night walking circles in the trailer, sweat freezing on her skin each time she stepped outside to breathe. Ray Jr. drove her to the county hospital in Ray Sr.'s truck because his own was on blocks, the old man riding shotgun with a paper bag of boiled eggs and a thermos of coffee laced with something stronger. They wouldn't let either man pass the delivery room doors. Ray Sr. paced the hallway in his church boots, chewing a toothpick to splinters, while Ray Jr. sat on the plastic chair staring at the maternity ward mural of smiling storks until the paint blistered under his eyes. When the doctor finally came out, mask dangling, she looked like someone who'd seen the underside of the world and didn't like the smell. She asked to speak to Eulalie alone. Ray Jr. started to argue, but the nurse, someone Eulalie had gone to school with, put a hand on his arm and shook her head once, hard. Inside the room the baby lay on Eulalie's chest, red and wrinkled and perfect except for the details that weren't. The left foot turned inward just enough to notice, toes webbed like a duck's as far as the first joint. A thin membrane joined the second and third fingers on both hands. And the ears, God, the ears, carried that extra ridge, a little fold of cartilage high on the helix that every Fontenot born since 1893 had carried in the daguerreotypes hidden in Ray Sr.'s Bible. The doctor spoke softly, words like autosomal recessive, and founder effect, and coefficient of relationship 0.28, numbers that meant the child was its own first cousin twice over and more. She offered counseling, termination of future pregnancies, a referral to a specialist in Jackson who'd written papers on isolated populations in the Delta. Eulalie heard none of it. She was staring at the perfect slope of the baby's forehead and seeing Ray Sr. at 20, 30, 50, 70, every age superimposed until the years collapsed into one long hungry face. Ray Jr. pushed in anyway, took one look, and started crying the way men do when they think no one's watching, silent, shoulders shaking, snot bubbling. He reached out a trembling finger and touched the webbed toes, then the ear ridge, reverent as a priest touching relics. "He's got the mark," he whispered, voice cracking. All the strong ones did. Ray Sr. followed, smelling of wintergreen snuff and hospital antiseptic. He didn't cry. He just stood at the foot of the bed staring down at the child with something close to triumph, eyes shining wet and bright. When the baby yawned, showing a tongue too large for its mouth, the old man laughed once, low and satisfied, the same sound he made when a hound finally treed the coon it had been chasing all night. Outside the window the sun came up thin and pale, turning the frost on the glass blood red for one heartbeat before it melted away. The girl was 16 the summer she came to Eulalie holding a drugstore test with 2 pink lines bright as fresh blood. Her name was Delphine Ray Fontenot, called Del by everyone who loved her and Ray's girl by those who didn't, and she looked so much like Eulalie at that age it hurt to see. Same wary doe eyes, same stubborn lift of chin, same mouth that could lie sweet as honey and cut like a straight razor. They were on the back porch shelling butter beans into a dented colander, cicadas screaming in the pines, when Delphine set the plastic stick on the step between them like a dead thing. Eulalie's hands kept moving, snapping pods, but the beans fell through her fingers and scattered across the boards like pale hail. "Whose is it?" she asked, already knowing the answer would be poison. Delphine's gaze slid sideways to the barn where Ray Jr. and his daddy were drinking beer and arguing over a carburetor. "Does it matter?" she said, voice small but steady. "They're both gonna say it's a blessing either way." The sun hung low and mean, turning the air thick as sorghum. Eulalie felt the years collapse again, every bruise, every whispered justification, every night she'd lain awake listening to the house breathe its old, sour breath. The child inside Delphine was already marked, she knew it the way you know thunder before the sky splits. Same blood, same circle, same slow drowning. She looked at her daughter, at the delicate ridge on the girl's left ear that caught the light like a secret, at the way her fingers worried the frayed hem of her shorts the exact way Ray Sr. did when he lied. Delphine had started asking questions months ago, why the family Bible locked with a rusty padlock, why no pictures existed of Grandma Fontenot, why every cousin on Mama's side looked like strangers while Daddy's side all shared the same pale eyes. Eulalie stood up so fast the colander overturned, beans rolling into the cracks between the planks to rot there forever. She walked inside without a word, came back with Ray Jr.'s deer rifle and the ring of keys he kept on a nail by the door. The metal was warm from the day's heat, slick in her palm. Delphine watched, wide-eyed, as her mother unlocked the Bible for the first time in 16 years. Pages crackled like dry leaves. Eulalie turned to the back, to the cramped columns of births and deaths that looped and doubled until the ink ran together, then ripped out the last written page, the one with Delphine's own birth recorded in Ray Jr.'s careful hand, the one that left a blank line waiting for the next name. She tore it once, twice, into confetti that fluttered down white and damning onto the scattered beans. "Get your things," Eulalie said, voice raw from years of silence. "We're leaving before the moon comes up." Behind them the screen door creaked, and Ray Sr.'s shadow stretched long across the porch boards, the rifle in his hands catching the last red sliver of sun like it had been waiting its whole life for this exact moment. Ray Sr. stood on the top step in his overalls and bare feet, the .410 across his forearm like he was just fixing to shoot a possum in the henhouse. The sun had dropped behind the pines, leaving the yard in that bruised purple light where everything looks half dead already. He didn't raise the gun, not yet, he just let it rest there, casual, the way a man holds a Bible when he wants you to remember who taught him the verses. "Eulalie May," he said, soft as preaching, "you fixin' to run off with my grandbaby's grandbaby." Delphine shrank against her mother's side. Eulalie felt the girl trembling, felt the new life inside her flutter like a trapped moth. She kept the torn page scraps in her fist, paper cuts stinging where the edges had bitten. "You done had your turn," she told him. "Ain't no more turns left." He smiled the same brown-toothed smile he'd worn the night the lights went out, the night the jar broke, the night the circle closed the first time. "Blood don't ask permission," he said. "It just keeps comin' home." Ray Jr. appeared behind him in the doorway, shirtless, confused, beer bottle dangling from 2 fingers. "Mama. What's all this?" Eulalie looked at her husband, really looked, and saw the boy he'd been at 19, sunburned and eager, promising her the world on a blanket by the creek, and the man he'd become, hollowed out by the same hunger that lived in his daddy's eyes. She saw the ridge on his ear, the slight inward turn of his left foot, the way the family curse had crept gentle as kudzu until it strangled everything soft. She brought the rifle up smooth, the way he taught her when they were still courting, cheek welded to stock, breath half out. The barrel pointed between the old man's feet, close enough that the heat shimmered off the bluing. "Move," she said. Ray Sr. didn't. He took one step down instead, slow, deliberate, the gun still lazy across his arm. "You shoot me," he said, "and that baby's still gonna have my eyes. Ain't no road far enough." Lightning bugs rose from the grass in a sudden cloud, blinking green and gold around his head like a dark halo. Delphine whimpered. Somewhere a hound started that low, mournful howling again, the sound the holler made when it knew it was about to feed. Eulalie thumbed the safety off. The click was loud as a bone breaking. "Then let it have them looking at the inside of a prison," she said, and pulled the trigger. The blast took the porch light clean out of its socket, glass raining down like hard rain. Ray Sr. staggered, more surprised than hurt, a red furrow opened across the meat of his shoulder. The .410 clattered down the steps. Ray Jr. dropped his beer and just stood there, mouth open, as the night rushed in to fill the space the gunshot left behind. Eulalie grabbed Delphine's hand, hot, sticky, alive, and dragged her past the bleeding old man, past the stunned husband, down the steps and across the yard where the truck keys waited in the visor of Ray Jr.'s broke-down Chevy. The engine coughed twice, caught, headlights cutting twin tunnels through the dark. Behind them Ray Sr. was already laughing, wet and ragged, calling her name like a prayer or a curse, she couldn't tell which anymore. She floored it, red dust boiling up behind the tires, the holler swallowing the house whole as the road finally, let them go. They made it as far as the Louisiana line before the truck started coughing blood-colored smoke and died beside a cypress swamp that smelled of rot and old secrets. Dawn was a thin gray smear above the water when Eulalie and Delphine climbed out, barefoot on the gravel shoulder, the torn Bible pages still clenched in Eulalie's fist like a handful of dead moths. Delphine was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Morning sickness had her bent over the ditch, retching nothing but bile while dragonflies stitched the air above her head. Eulalie stood guard with the rifle across her arms, watching the road behind them for headlights that never came. The swamp breathed slow and wet around them, bullfrogs starting their rusty chorus, and for one moment she thought they might actually be free. Then she saw the sign half swallowed by kudzu, "Welcome to Fontenot Crossing, POP 214. The paint was peeling, but the name was still there, carved deep into the wood the way the family carved itself into everything it touched. They had run west instead of north, too panicked to read the map right, and the land had curved them back like a fishhook. Delphine straightened, wiped her mouth, followed her mother's gaze. "Mama." Eulalie felt the years collapse a final time. She saw Ray Sr.'s shoulder wound already scabbed over in her mind, saw Ray Jr. loading dogs into the truck bed, saw every mile they'd put between themselves and the holler eaten up by back roads that all led home. The swamp water reflected the sky the color of a healing bruise. She opened her hand and let the shredded pages fall. They fluttered down pale and weightless, soaked instantly, sank without a sound. Delphine started crying then, quiet hiccuping sobs that sounded too old for 16. Eulalie pulled her close, felt the girl's belly hard against her own softening one, felt the new life kick in protest at being squeezed. Somewhere far off a truck backfired, or maybe it was a gunshot, impossible to tell anymore. "We ain't never leaving," Delphine whispered into her mother's neck. "Are we?" Eulalie looked at the swamp, at the cypress knees rising like drowned gravestones, at the road that disappeared into green darkness in both directions. She thought of the child inside her daughter, already marked, already claimed, already swimming in blood so thick it remembered every wrong turn for 200 years. She pressed her lips to Delphine's hair that smelled of gunpowder and butter beans and the faint copper sweetness of fear. "No, baby," she said, voice steady as river stone. "We just changed which part of the cage we rattle." Behind them the sun finally broke free, spilling thin light across the water, and every cypress shadow pointed straight back the way they'd come. Years later, when the state finally came with clipboards and court orders, they found the place by following the smell. It drifted out of the holler on still August air, sweet rot, wood smoke, something coppery underneath, and led the deputies down the washed-out logging road to where the house had once stood. Nothing was left but the chimney stones, and a rusted tin roof collapsed inward like a crushed lung. Morning glories had taken the porch, purple throats wide open, drinking rust and memory. They found Ray Jr. first, sitting on an overturned bucket in what used to be the kitchen, beard gone white, eyes milky with cataracts. He was carving a tiny coffin from pine, humming an old French hymn his mammy taught him before she died, birthing his uncle who was also his cousin. When the deputies asked where everyone was, he just pointed the knife toward the barn and kept whittling. Inside the barn the light came through gaps in the siding in dusty gold bars. Ray Sr., 93 now and still upright, sat in a rocker made from cypress knees, a quilt over his lap despite the heat. The quilt moved. Beneath it a woman lay curled on a pallet of Spanish moss, belly swollen tight as a tick, skin so pale the blue veins showed through like river maps. Her hair had gone silver early, cut short with a hunting knife, and the ridge on her ears caught the light the same way it always had. Delphine, or what was left of her after 4 more pregnancies and no doctor closer than 60 miles of bad road. On the wall behind them hung the family Bible, spine cracked open, pages swollen with damp. Someone had kept writing in the back, names, dates, the same 6 surnames repeating until the ink bled together. The newest entry was fresh, still wet, Eulalie Fontenot, born screaming on the blood moon, 6 fingers on the left hand, eyes the color of swamp water at twilight. Ray Sr. rocked slow, the chair creaking like old bones. When the deputy stepped closer he didn't look up, just spoke to the quilt-covered shape at his feet. "Told you girls the land don't let go," he said, voice soft as preacher cotton. "Roads all curve back. Rivers too. Even the wind comes home to roost." One of the younger deputies gagged and turned away. The older one, born not 20 miles from the holler, just stared at the Bible and the tiny coffin taking shape in Ray Jr.'s lap and felt something cold settle in his chest like a stone. Outside, the morning glories kept blooming, bright and poisonous, over the place where the porch steps used to be. The trial was held in Jackson because no courtroom in Lafayette Parish felt safe from the family's reach. They brought Delphine in through a side entrance, wrists cuffed with the soft restraints they use on the pregnant and the half-mad. She wore a shapeless gray dress that hid the newest swell, hair hacked short, eyes fixed on nothing. The bailiff had to guide her to the stand like a sleepwalker. Reporters filled the benches, notebooks open, smelling blood. The prosecutor, a woman from Ohio who still believed in clean endings, laid out the evidence in calm: surgical slices, DNA reports thick as phone books, birth certificates with the same 6 names rotating like a broken wheel, photographs of children with too many fingers and too few futures. She called it the most documented case of multi-generational criminal inbreeding in American history. When it was the defense's turn, the public defender, a tired man who'd lost every case that mattered, rested without calling witnesses. He simply opened the Bible they'd pried from Ray Sr.'s dead hands after the barn fire and read from the back pages in a voice that cracked on every date. The jury filed out at dusk and came back in 9 minutes flat. Guilty on all counts: Ray Jr. for rape and incest, Delphine for continuing the cycle with knowledge, the old man posthumously for everything else. The foreman was crying when he said it. They sentenced Delphine to 30 years, but the baby was born first, right there in the prison infirmary, screaming loud enough to rattle the bars. A girl, 6 pounds 2 ounces, perfect webbing between the toes, the ridge on both ears sharp as a blade. The state took her before the cord was cut, wrapped her in a state-issue blanket, and drove away fast with lights but no siren. Delphine stood at the window watching the taillights disappear, blood still running down her legs, and started laughing the way people do when the last door slams. The sound echoed down the cinderblock corridor and kept going long after the guards told her to stop. Outside, the evening news ran drone footage of the burned holler, blackened chimney stones, morning glories already pushing up green through the ash. The anchor called it closure. The anchor was wrong. In a courthouse hallway, a social worker opened the blanket to check the newborn's chart and saw the eyes, pale swamp water gray, ancient, unblinking, staring straight through her like they already knew every road she'd ever taken, how every one curved back. The baby didn't cry again. She just smiled, small and knowing, the same brown-toothed smile the Fontenots had worn for 200 years, and waited for the land to call her home. The child was renamed Mercy Jones, a clean name, a state name, and placed with a couple in Minnesota who had a porch swing and a golden retriever and no idea what they were raising. They sent Christmas pictures every year: blonde pigtails, gap-toothed grins, a face scrubbed free of history. The file stayed sealed. The social workers called it a success. At night Mercy walked in her sleep. She was for the first time they found her barefoot in the snow, standing at the edge of the cornfield staring south like a compass needle dragged by a magnet no one else could feel. By 7 she drew the same crooked house over and over, chimney stones and morning glories, even though she had never seen kudzu or a tin roof in her life. At 10 she woke the house screaming in Cajun French she'd never been taught, words tasting of river mud and gunpowder. The adoptive parents took her to therapists, then to neurologists, then quietly stopped asking questions when the dreams kept coming. They locked the doors, installed alarms, nailed the bedroom window shut. Mercy learned to pick locks with bobby pins and wait for snow to cover her tracks. On her 16th birthday she stole the car keys while they slept, left a note that said thank you and I'm sorry in the same breath, and drove south without a map. The roads unrolled like someone else's memory, Minnesota to Iowa to Missouri, each mile warmer, heavier, scented with pine sap and distant rain. She crossed the Mississippi at Memphis just after dawn, water the color of weak coffee sliding beneath the bridge, and felt something inside her chest click into place like a dislocated bone finally set. Louisiana welcomed her with open arms of humidity and dragonflies. She followed back roads that grew narrower and meaner, past cypress knees and rusted mailboxes, until the pavement gave out altogether and red dirt took over. The truck, an old Chevy bought with babysitting money, coughed its last in the exact spot Eulalie's had died 24 years earlier, beside the same swamp, beneath the same half-eaten sign that now read only Fontenot cross IG. Mercy got out barefoot, the gravel warm under her soles for the first time in her life. The morning glories had won. They covered everything: chimney stones, barn ribs, the twisted frame of a burned house, in purple so deep it looked black from a distance. She walked through them like walking through a bruise. In the center of what used to be the yard stood a single rocker made from cypress knees, empty, waiting. She sat down without thinking. The chair fit her the way a coffin is said to fit the dead. Somewhere a hound barked once, far off, then thought better of it. Mercy closed her eyes and felt the land breathe against her skin, slow and patient and hungry. When she opened them again, the sun was setting behind the pines, bleeding red across the water, and every shadow pointed straight at her heart. She smiled, small, brown-toothed, ancient, and began to rock.